If we got tourist permanent accommodations in Reims, it'd probably be a lot cheaper than Paris, huh? But Romery has some contacts from so all that's being worked out. But you could really do the Lasallian Paris in one day. Now, if we want to be serious about a Lasallian thing and forget the Folie Bergère and all the rest of the attractions in Paris, if it's the first time there. So maybe a day, day and a half in Paris. You can certainly do Reims in a day, the essence of it anyway. Of course, you can't get out to the countryside and Brouilly and all that. Maybe we could. And then Rouen, certainly in a day. And a lot of that could be done in a walking trip. So one day at each of those places, then go take the train, that fast train down to Lyon, and go have a bus bring us from there to Parmeny, spend maybe 2 days in Parmeny, Grenoble, Grand Chartreuse thing, and then take a bus and stop somewhere in between for lunch and get to Mons, hit Saugues on the way, because that's that same territory, and see the Benilde thing. Get to Mons, stay overnight at Mons, then back to Avignon, pull up in Avignon and do Marseille out of Avignon. And then maybe fly back to the States, possibly from the south someplace, because they have connections. So it could be done in 10 days, without too often much, I'm sure. Did everybody sign the card for Andrew? Frank did not.
Oh, sorry there, Gus.
Okay, all right. Now, have you got that sheet that I gave yesterday with the map of Paris, with the map of France down at the bottom? Okay, so here's the sequence. And this, just to get ourselves, now this, we're covering here basically a period of a little more than 2 years. The 1711 dates there, that's the first trip that he made, and then he comes back to deal with the Clément affair, leaves the stuff in the hands of his lawyer, sees that he's about to be condemned. So from 1712 in February 18th, he leaves Paris. That date is fixed, I think, it has something to do with the way Lent was falling. And now the question is, what route did he take? We don't really know, but he may well have gone first to Alès, or maybe Mons, then to Gravières, and then, or Gravières and Mons, one way or the other, and Les Vins, and then he finally gets to Marseille. And of course, that's where we have the problem. These are the problem areas. So what was going on at Marseille, and why was there such a sudden change in the attitude towards the founder and the brothers? That's the first question we have to. He thought of going to Rome from Marseille, but he didn't. The novitiate opens, he gets faculties for confessions and preaching and so on. Everything's going fine through the rest of that year, 1712. By 1713, sometime in March, the whole thing has changed around. And all of a sudden, this opposition has developed. So he goes to the Santa Baume and possibly St. Maximin and experiences the dark night of the soul. You have an idea now visually of what that place was like. Then he goes, from there, he goes over to Mons. He's not welcome at the brother's place for one reason or another. Then to the Capuchins, and then to Mademoiselle Lescour. Then Timothy comes to visit him there. The novitiate has closed. Timothy had been the director of novices, and Timothy comes looking for a new assignment. And that's where the founder is so discouraged, and he says, the brothers don't really want me. However, Timothy persuades him that, yes, he is so wanted, so he goes to Grenoble, but there again, he still lives in a kind of a retired situation. However, he's still interested enough in what's going on to send Brother Jacques to Paris to find out what's going on up there, and he replaces him in class and takes the kids to that church of St. Lawrence, where one of them scribbled a graffito on the outside of the church door. He makes the retreat at the Grand Chartreuse. Over the winter, he has another attack of rheumatism. After he begins to convalesce, he's looking for a place to make a retreat. Parmeny is recommended. He goes there. This big question of how long, if you read only my affair, you'd think he was only there for 2 weeks. But there's a lot of other evidence that indicates he was there much longer. On April the 1st, the brothers in Paris say, well, the whole thing is falling apart. We command you in virtue of the vow to come back. He doesn't come back right away. There's a long delay, and that's another one of the problems. Why did it take him so long? Well, an awful lot has been made lately about this command to return and his obedience to the body of the society, but it certainly, if it was blind obedience, it certainly was not prompt, which is one of his own characteristics, because it wasn't until August the 10th, which It is some months later that he finally gets back and he says, "Here I am, what do you want me to do?" And then he refuses to do anything. But, and that's for tomorrow. But, so that's the sequence to have in mind, all right? And it's all summarized for you there. So now, I presume you've read Bland, his account of the thing, and if you've read Encounters, I don't have anything more to say except what I'm saying here in conjunction with Burckhardt. This started off as a translation of Burckhardt after my first visit to Parmeny in 1982, I think it was. But then with this whole question of our increasing awareness of the importance of this, and Gus and myself having an internecine feud, where I was trying to say the founder was ready to quit and give up, and Gus was saying, no, all the evidence is that he was still interested in the brothers. So this turns into a modified version.
You want it tonight.
Yes. So,
Great coincidence that this is the topic I'm talking about
tonight. Yeah. So you can choose between Bland, Burckhardt, Loes, and Salm. You'll have a variety. So there are lots of problems, and of course, one of the problems with Battersby is Battersby would never even go to Parmeny. He didn't think it was important, and he passes it over very quickly. This is the second Lasallian thing that I produced, by the way, and I was since the first one was Beginnings, I was almost tempted to call this one Endings. So my own interest in Lasallian Studies started with the Beginnings in Reims, then I got fascinated with Parmeny at the end, and then since then I filled in all the stuff in between. So it's kind of a way to go about it. So all right, so let's talk about these things one after the other. Let's talk about Marseille, first of all. Now, I haven't got much more to say except what's here. But does anybody want to? Frank?
Are you inclined to rule out in Marseille Jansenism as one of the main troublemakers?
Yes.
Did I hear you correctly?
Yes. Yves Poutet has convinced me of that. And first of all, if we're talking about 1711, 12, 13, the Bull Unigenitus was not issued until late 1713, and it wasn't issued from Rome, and it wasn't promulgated in France until early in 1714, right? And although there probably were some Jansenist influences there, they were not major. Poutet has done an awful lot of research on these various French societies, and he thinks that it's the Company of the Blessed Sacrament, which was founded out of Lyon, and was very much influenced by the policies of Charles Damien. That was the dominant influence. And this Company of the Blessed Sacrament, it was almost like a kind of a secret society. And they had penetrated Marseille very deeply. So they had established a bureau of the schools. And so they were in charge of the schools, this Company of the Blessed Sacrament. They were, and they also had a bureau of the poor. And it was a kind of reform movement, one of these ways of trying to implement the decisions of the Council of Trent and to get a reformed version of Catholicism going in these cities in France. And so they were very much influenced by the Damien position that they ought to have schools for the poor, and they ought to get the sisters. They had Barret's sisters in Marseille, but then that the boys ought to be taught by young seminarians and young clerics, right? And so that was, the Jansenism was probably not, see, Bland is writing when the Jansenism thing it's on his mind. And of course, all of that comes later. But it was not the major focus here. So the real problem, as I say in the thing there, was probably those two brothers, if you think about it. The school was opened in 1706. Two of them were sent from Avignon to Marseille. Here they ran this very, very successful school. Everybody wanted to send their kids there. The school was a success. The two of them were thriving on the success of the school. They were well liked by the people. They had good contacts with all of the parents and so on and so forth. And all of a sudden along comes De La Salle, opens a novitiate and says, well, now you can begin to observe the rule. Now you can come here, we'll have the mental prayer forever. And we can have recreation of rule, and we can have shots on Friday night, and we can have all of these things. And wouldn't that be lovely? And so they go back to the parish and say, look at what that man's doing. He's taking us away from you. You're the one supporting us here and so on, but we can't stay. We can't be relating to you anymore. We can't come to dinner tonight. We have to go over to that stupid novitiate with those young kids. So that undoubtedly was a major factor, and it becomes clear. One of them is probably the Maydard who goes and over to Mond and creates all the trouble over there. So that's one factor. And the other factor was De La Salle's own policies. They expected that, when the bishop wanted to set up schools in the four parishes, and De La Salle was cooperating with that and so on, and there was a certain amount of support, and they supported the novitiate. But then when he made it clear, and of course one of the reasons is that the people from the north didn't understand these southerners, the language. Well, Emily Keyes a few years ago insisted that it was a totally foreign language in the Languedoc. That's discussable how much it was possible for an ordinary French-speaking person to understand the language down in Marseille, but at any rate, they spoke a different language, they had a totally different culture. But the founder wanted the novices, when they finished their novitiate, to be dispensable so that they could be sent anywhere, including possibly Rome, which may be another reason why Roland never got anybody, because the founder was hoping to send them somebody from here. So that was one policy. The fact that he would have control over that these were not novices just for Marseille. The other thing is that he absolutely refused to have the brothers take the tonsure. And most of the wills that were the source of the money had left the money in these foundations for a gratuitous school for boys that would be conducted by an ecclesiastic, because that was the system. So they were really going contrary to the letter they didn't worry about that in the beginning. But when especially probably that pastor of the Yacoul began to see that the De La Salle approach to running gratuitous schools was very different from the way they conceived of the whole operation, and that he wanted to control it independently. It's the same story that he ran into every place. And of course then the brothers themselves said to him, what the hell are you doing here? We had it made until you came along. Everything was great. We were all set to go, and you come and louse up the whole operation with your own stubbornness and your own insistence on these things, and making everybody come to the novitiate, and not letting us take the tonsure, and not keeping an emphasis here. So that's probably the reason why the opposition. But Blain, of course, carries the story right straight through to the end. Once the founder gets out of there, as a matter of fact, the schools did begin to prosper. And by the time Blain is writing, he says that it's one of the most thriving centers of the Institute in France, as he's writing in the 1720s and 30s. Okay, enough of that. Gabe.
You know when he says here, compost in that section on Marseille, he says it's the period where the founder took a prophetic self-examination into his personal areas of admission. And as if God were saying, if you leave, it will be consolidated, the work. You go to the hindrance. You see that, again, when somebody writes something like that, to me it touches on kind of an excuse. I'd rather accept your explanation that's more realistic. There were things there that had to be corrected. His presence would disturb people.
Yes.
Because what was going on was forming a parochial system again.
Yes, but I think in that observation, though, that's why I've separated out Saint-Aubin. One thing is, why did, from the point of view of the people of the Marseillaise, remember, what's the French national anthem from the Revolution? La Marseillaise. It was the Marseille people that started it. Okay. So that's why I've separated, however, Marseille, which is why did the people turn against him? And the Saint-Aubin question, once he decides to get out of the way and blame himself, then I think that's what Campos is talking about. So I don't see an incompatibility. So that's the second problem. What was on De La Salle's mind? Was he ready to abandon the whole thing? Now, Blain, of course, says that he had always thought of going to a parish to help with converted sinners. So I think that thing of Campos is probably pretty good. And of course, would he have had a problem leaving the brothers that he had vowed to associate with? And I think Campos very interestingly turns the thing around. Was he leaving the brothers, or had the brothers abandoned him? Or did he perceive it that way anyhow? Which he must certainly have done. Look at that Well, we'll do it when we come to Mons. But he had that sense of abandonment by the brothers, and if Bland, now of course this dark night of the soul of 40 days may be, again, imposing on the founder something that's classic in spirituality and a sense of abandonment by God, but maybe he felt that way. But there's no doubt that he certainly seemed to be blaming himself for all the trouble. And I think also that famous statement, the work is yours, to put the thing in God's hands, and if God wants it to succeed, it'll succeed. And that the success of it might very well depend on his being willing to give it up. We still talk about one of the things in Lasallian spirituality, are you ready to let go? Because we want to hang on to things. It's one of the big problems of the brothers. One of the problems you have running the district. Nobody wants to let go of where they are, or what they've been doing, or the things they have, or our little toys. And so we're all caught into that. Don't even want to let go of Buttimer.
This struck me from reading that, almost that he lost his nerve during that time. Hasn't there seemed to be a great and the Institute seemed to be falling apart, and these rumors were that he had left it and so on. And it would have been so easy just to write to my colleague and say, I'm thinking a year out or 3 years out or whatever, but you look after the show. But he didn't do that. Things seemed to be just falling down. He didn't seem to be reacting at all to anything.
Oh, well, yeah, if you imagine the sense that he felt when he got that letter from Bartholomew using the, superior ring sort of thing, and felt that the brothers in France the brothers in Paris didn't want it, and then everything's going fine for a while in Marseille, and all of a sudden the thing begins to collapse there. Sure. How much of a mental breakdown, Mike, did you have?
The first brothers who came from the north. Now the brothers that had all the problems with, did they come from the north, or were they?
Well, the first two would have come from Avignon, and they would not have come out of the. I'm not sure that he ever got any brothers out of that Avignon novitiate at all already. That stayed. Gus, do you think? What do you think? I doubt it. It wasn't. It didn't last long enough, so they all would have come from up above. Sure, and Matthias and all those people that he's writing. Remember, he's writing to Matthias in Mons, way off there in the corner. Phil?
On page 103, it says, in the third paragraph, as mentioned before, it was a Jesuit who had first launched the idea of this school. That was where the trouble lay.
Well, that's because Blount is trying to build up a case about the Jansenism. See, now there was a Jesuit who gave the retreat talks before the founder arrived there in this parish. It built up a big thing about the need to have schools in all the parishes for these boys. And so, well, the schools were actually founded in each of these parishes in the late 1680s, 1685. I have the dates here somewhere from Poutet. But the Jesuit was saying we've got to put more emphasis on this, and so there was a climate, all right, to raise up this whole question. But since Blount wants to make the whole Jesuits the heart of the problem, okay, he conceives that there's a secret enemy someplace who wants to get even with the Jesuits who are against Jansenism. See, that's why he gets the Jebbi in there. Because the Jebbis stand for defenders of, and he calls them Molinists sometimes, even though he says that maybe they never even read Molina. But that's the reason for that. Anything else on the founder's attitude in this thing? And so now the question is, when did Timothy come to him? Timothy come to him in the Santa Bon. Mayafer has him come to him in Mons, where he goes over to Mons. So it doesn't make any difference, but the confrontation with Timothy is important. So let's go to Mons before we finish with that. Okay, now he doesn't get a very good reception in Mons. Those who want to gloss this thing over and make the brothers look pretty good say, well, the reason why they couldn't keep him in the house very long is because they didn't have room. Because there are a fair number of brothers there by this time. But again, some of the word from Paris, it's hard to say why the brothers didn't receive him. Or did they were they afraid that he had wrecked things pretty much in Marseille, and possibly that Brother Médard was over there by that time. So anyway, whatever the reason, he goes with the Capuchins to make a retreat for a week, and then this Mademoiselle Lescure rescues him, and he's settled there, and he's not in any hurry to go anywhere. And he even toyed with the idea, and it's probably there where Timothy comes to him looking for a new assignment. And so that confrontation, I think, is worth looking at. Page 116. Now remember, Timothy is the superior general while Blan is writing this. Huh? So this is, I have it the other way around. Blan hasn't come to Amand, and that's the reason for it, because Timothy, he would have known Timothy. Bottom of 115. After the pious founder had spent some time at the hermitage we mentioned, he retired to another solitary place in the city of Mond. There, far from men's eyes, the servant of God believed people were thinking of him as little as he thought of them. He was persuaded they had forgotten him. He was not a little surprised when the brother director to whom he had entrusted the new novitiate came to meet him in this new solitude. If I had 3 hours to show the slides, I have a picture of where that novitiate was in Marseille, of which Timothy had been in charge. You only got about 1/3 or 1/4 of my slide collection this morning. Aren't you glad? Somebody once said that the only difference between a good photographer and a bad photographer is that a good photographer throws away all of his bad pictures. The good photographer only keeps the ones that come out, and come out well. De La Salle's departure had hastened the despair of the novitiate, and so on his enemies. Now, on the next page, the news did not surprise John Baptist that the novitiate had collapsed. What amazed him was that anyone should still think of him. Like a man convinced that his memory had faded from the earth, he replied, "God be blessed." Now, so here's Timothy asking for his time. "What leads you to address yourself to me? Do you not know how unfit I am to command others? Can you be ignorant of the fact that quite a few don't want me anymore? That these words of the gospel seem to apply to me? We will not have this man for our superior. They are quite right, for I am incapable of being such any longer." So the brother, would be Timothy, confused, edified, and touched by these words, displayed the sentiments of his soul, letting his eyes speak for his lips. And then Blan says, this brother is the one who succeeded Bartholomew. So, but Timothy got turned away the same way that the founder had been turned away. That's another good reason for thinking that business of being turned away has some basis in fact. And the reason for thinking that it was at Mond is because that's where Blan puts it. It's my affair who puts it up in the Saint-Bon. All right, so this is a very dramatic encounter. So this, I think, is the beginning of the rehabilitation of the founder, if you will. And so he decides to go back to Avignon, and then back to Grenoble, probably by way of Avignon. And so there he is in Grenoble, where he's very well received by the brothers. I mean, Grenoble was a place where apparently he was very, very happy. But still kept a solitary existence. Now, the question to raise about the Grenoble situation is, well, he did send Brother Jacques to Paris to find out what was going on. And he went to the Grand Chartreuse for a weekend retreat. Was he tempted? Was he looking around for a place to retire permanently? I think that this may be one of the questions there. He was well received by the brothers, but he didn't get very much involved except for that period where he replaced the brother. And here's where he did spent a lot of time getting his books together and finishing up on his writing, which of course Gus will insist is part of the reason that he still thought of himself as somehow involved with the Institute. But he's taking his time to make up his mind what he's going to do. But the other side of the coin is, of course, as Blank keeps saying over and over again, nobody up in the north really knew where he was. He wasn't answering letters. Some letters got through to him and he just wouldn't reply to them, etc. So there's no question that he still was in this withdrawal pattern in some sense, anyway, however you want to balance it all. All right, and it's here he gets the rheumatism. Now, how old Helvetius got all the way down here is another interesting question. Blan likes to repeat incidents. He did have rheumatism. Whether or not they put him on the grill again, I suppose, is another question. We have to, those of us who are concocting awards to give tomorrow night, we really have to give a Dr. Helvetius award to somebody. Maybe we'll have to find out who arranged that barbecue the other day. But our group is sponsoring a good part of that party tomorrow night, by the way. Or I wonder if this remedy was such that it could be easily improvised, and the founder was aware that this would have to be done to relieve his rheumatism. But at any rate, he goes through some kind of therapy at this point. Gus, have you anything thought on that? Did it ever occur to you about that grill business in Paris and then down here?
I agree with you. It seems strange that Mauritius, important as he was up in the north, come down to Grenoble.
And especially if nobody knew where he was. And of course, he was up in that drafty room up in the tower too all this time. And so no wonder his rheumatism recurred.
I think they knew where he was.
Yeah. Well, Bland doesn't think they did. You could plug that out a little bit.
Well, this afternoon, I guess.
I'll say at 4 o'clock. I don't think I'm coming. I'm having company tonight. Tonight you get to meet
Well, I
Honey.
sit in on 2 hours with you.
You all get to meet Honey, my younger sister tonight. They teach in the same school where this brother is from, so they want to go to the funeral. So I tell them to come to dinner. So, well, anyway, that's the Grenoble situation. Now he goes to Parmeny. Now the question with Parmeny is, how long was he there? It certainly was more than 2 weeks. He might have gone there for retreat for 2 weeks, then going back to the Grenoble community. But as made clear in the Encounters thing, it's from the biographers of Sister Louise that we find out about the fact that, first of all, Yves de Sallion, who was the one who brought the brothers to Grenoble in the first place, Yves de Sallion was acting as the chaplain for the Sister Louise operation. And of course, she wasn't a nun in the modern sense of the word. She was a shepherdess and a kind of a recluse and a visionary of sorts and so on. And apparently served, the founder found her helpful in working his way through his own problems and so on. And Yves de Sallion probably figured, well, here's a man looking to just kind of retire, and he's looking for a nice quiet place and something useful to do. People are coming here to make retreats. He's marvelous in spiritual direction and so on and so forth, and he's a holy man. So Yves de Sallion has to go off on diocesan business. He makes a grand tour. He's on the verge of becoming a bishop. And so De La Salle, we know from that biography, is in charge at Parmeny for a full 30 days. So that's one thing. And then we also know from the biography of Sister Louise that this Claude Dulac de Montezebert, this wandering ex-gambling addict that the founder takes in, and so on, you read the whole story there in the Encounters, that he comes and De La Salle goes down to Grenoble to put the habit on him, and it's in the register of the school that he took the habit on the 6th of June. Foutet told me that he thinks that that's a mistake, that it was the 6th of May, but I forget what evidence he had for it. So there's this whole question of how significant was Parmeny and Sister Louise in the life operation of the founder. And for the longest while, the French brothers had very little regard for Parmeny and its significance, partially because they were all brainwashed by the biographers who make such little mention of it. They had lost all contact with the property. And it was Burckhardt who was studying over there, and I guess it was Grenoble, and writing his dissertation, and he decided to look this place up. And he found it, and he finally persuaded Nisset Joseph to buy it for the Institute. And so Nisset bought it, and I remember very distinctly in the 1967 chapter when we had the report from the Financial Commission, that and it came up for discussion on the chapter floor, all of the financial difficulties that poor old Nisset had. He had to sell, the diocese of Turin got all mixed up in that Filippini affair, in that institute up in Turin, and Parmeny, and he'd sell off a piece of the corner of the Mother House property to help get the money to pay for some of these things. Got trouble with the Holy See and they'd give poor old Nisset. These French brothers are absolutely heartless with the man, you know. And the Americans were kind of inclined to side with him on this, because the description we got of the property that at that time, 25 years ago in 1966, there was no electricity, no water, no road going into the thing whatsoever. It was just this property on top of a hill. And the ruins of this of the chapel that had been used for several different things, the history's there in the book. And what the hell do we want this for, was everybody's thing. And the Americans were laughing because it had, well, who would ever want to go to a place that, oh, we'll use it for a retreat center. So imagine asking some brothers to go there with no heat, no water, no electricity. And Burckhardt himself, as he was building this up, lived in a trailer for most of this time, and had to go down all the way, as Sister Louise did, to the bottom of the hill to bring the water up to the top of the hill. And that's where he lived, brother from the Santa Fe district. So for that reason, it's only recently that Parmeny has come into significance, and for that reason, Yves Boutet, for example, for the longest while, was very reluctant to admit that Parmeny had much significance at all. I visited him in his place outside Bordeaux, and I tried to push him a little bit. I said, on what basis do you want to minimize the stay of the founder there? Well, then he got kind of defensive, and he said, well, now we'll have to see. And I said, well, what about the Grâce de Villard? Oh, I've got that here someplace, and he dared get out, and he actually photocopied a piece of it. Now he says here, it says, he says, that's the clue. Well, I felt like saying, you're finally catching up to this, huh? Burckhardt was there long before you on this business. I didn't say that to him. So anyway, about 2 years ago, they had a confab at Parmeny itself. Michel, all of these squabblers were there. Rose didn't come across, but Yves Boutet came, Michel Sauvage came, I think Patrice, the former French assistant, came, and Burckhardt. And they all gave papers and had a powwow, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, Michel's paper was mostly on the command to return, a big analysis of that, and I got a copy of it. The others didn't have formal papers, but their original intention had been to publish a kind of a book, a new updated book on the most recent ideas about Parmeny. But so they're still trying to get enough together. So Burckhardt decided he's going to try and put all that together, and he went over there. He stopped at Manhattan just a couple of months ago on his way over there, but apparently from what I hear, he didn't get much of a reception in Rome for publishing this thing, the results of all of that thing. And of course, Burckhardt's inclined to overemphasize Parmeny, and the others are inclined to. But Michel Sauvage said, the last time I talked to him about this, he said, yes, he said, I think most of us are convinced that the founder was in Parmeny for on and off between February and all the way down into June, and that it was there that he received the command to return, that very, very significant command to return under the virtue of the law. So those are the problems associated with Parmeny.
In all of this interaction, that fellow Sallion, did he have a great big role to play, or was he minor to Sister Louise? A fellow by the name of Sallion?
Yes, Yves de Sallion. I've been talking about him.
Yeah, but I thought...
He's the one who was the chaplain. He was the priest chaplain.
Yeah.
Sister Louise was the mystic that a lot of people came to see. Sure, he had a big role. He was very important. He was the representative of the diocese, and he's the one who got John Baptist de La Salle to take his place. And he's a canon of the Church of St. Andrew. Remember, we saw the picture of the church there?
Yeah.
And he's the... so if we didn't know about him, and he's the one who in 1707 was the one who was instrumental in bringing the brothers to Grenoble in the first place when the school was open, and had the bishop offer to pay to their transportation, get them down there. Sure, he's important. Yes, Peter.
What's the BD and SS?
I put. I'm sorry, I skipped that. Anything, but let's finish the part. Anything else on Parmeny? Let's take a look at that command to return. We certainly ought to read that together. Where is it? 141, right at the very end. Yes, George.
It does mention in this, where you got this beginning,
Yeah.
that during this time in the late 1730s and the early 1740s, we rework the duties of a Christian. Was that a momentous task, you think, or take quite a bit of work, or you think that's just?
You mean 1713? Well, he's up.
It said from August 1713 on.
Yeah. Yeah, well,
I don't know
that's
when he started.
that's where he's reworking over some of his writings. But if you remember that list I gave in the beginning, the biggest of all of the things that the founder produced were those 3 volumes of the duties of a Christian. And then there's an abridged thing. If you go back and look at the list I gave you way back in the beginning.
Well, I guess I would think that maybe a good part of those 2 years, he was sort of, off by himself down there. He was really like a scholar off in a quiet place to do this work. And that was maybe one of the reasons why he was there. And he was really working for the Institute in a big way.
Well, that's Gus's theory.
Huh?
That's Gus's theory. That's why Gus thinks he was still interested in the Institute. But that was, he certainly, we know from all the accounts that while he was, not the whole time, just while he was in Grenoble, that there's no doubt that he spent part of his time in the retirement up in that room working on reworking some of his writings. It is an indication that he was still interested in making some contribution to this work. But whether or not he was going to, at that moment, whether his mind was set to go back to it or not is another thing. And he certainly, it's anachronistic to think of the founder as a scholar going off to do scholarly work. I mean, that would have been incidental to him. He liked to pray and beat himself up and all that sort of stuff. So let's...
He's been brainwashed by Blaine.
Page 139 at the bottom, this marvelous, marvelous letter. Our very dear Father, we, the principal brothers of the Christian schools, having in view the greater glory of God. Now, Michel Sauvage has analyzed the pants off of this thing, but he tries to show that it has exactly the same rhythm as the vowel formula. Having in view the greater glory of God, which is what they consecrated themselves to in the first place. The greater good of the church and of our society. Recognize that it is of the utmost importance that you should again take up the care and general government of the holy work of God, which is also yours, since it has pleased the Lord to make use of you to establish it and to direct it for such a long time. Everyone is convinced that God gave you and still gives you the graces and talents needed to govern properly this new society which is so useful to the church. It is only just for us to acknowledge that you have always governed it with much success and edification. This is why we very humbly beseech you and command you in the name and on behalf of the body of the society to which you have promised obedience to resume without delay the general government of society. Paris, April 1st, 1714. We are with the most profound respect, our dear Father, your humble and obedient inferior. Marvelous thing, huh? Now, of course, Bland says that the brothers were wrong to write to him in those words. Well, who are these brothers to deal with the canon that way? But it's a remarkable thing, and of course, any treatise on Lasallian spirituality takes this very, very seriously, especially since the thesis of Miguel Campos. Gus?
As you read that, particularly the top 4 or 5 lines, what came to my mind was Timothy in Avignon had written to Paris and told the brothers that Del Sal has the impression that he's no longer needed and that you don't want him. And that's why, after giving that the glory of God preamble, the whole stress of those 5 lines is, we need you, the work is yours, you've done a good job, and we want you back. I think that's what's happened.
Yeah, it's evident that theme is there. They must have had some sense of how he felt about them, and that he wanted some assurance that the association was still intact and that they had not abandoned him. There's no question. But this does the trick, but it takes a while. But now, every time, somewhere in here, whether to put it after or before, is what's going on with Brother Bartholomew and the Sulpicians back there. Huh? And we better take a look at that for a minute on page 131. Why did they write that thing? Because everything was such a mess up there. Huh? And what was happening was they saw the the original vision of De La Salle going right down the tubes before their very eyes. Huh? So if you look at the bottom paragraph on 131, here's this De Breu, who's in cahoots with Tardy, right? And so he gets them, first of all, to begin to call him the superior. Now, De Breu replaced Bricot, the one that the cardinal had imposed, huh? And it was supposed to be only a token thing, according to that written agreement they got. But once Bricot said, oh, I don't want any part of this, old Tardy gets De Breu in there, huh? He's an agent of the Sulpicians, and there's no question what the Sulpicians wanted. Look at the conditions. The main points of his new organization were these. 1, the brothers should have superiors from outside the community, men capable of directing them, something like the external superiors who direct nuns. And so Bartholomew agreed to this. And so the brothers were instructed every place where they were to get an ecclesiastical superior. So the one they got in Rouen was Blanc himself. And of course the one they got in Paris was De Breu. 2nd, the house and parish should form a separate entity and should depend entirely on the ecclesiastical superior. Okay, break it off from the rest of it. 3, the novitiate should be suppressed as a useless burden. It costs too much to educate and feed all the novices. We've seen all the way along through the thing. The pastors of Saint-Sulpice didn't want Vaugirard. They didn't want the Grand Maison. They didn't want the novitiate. There is no need for so many in Paris, so many novices, since the brothers should remain fixed in the schools where they taught. That's the Paris idea, it was the Reims idea, and it was the Marseille idea. As will be explained below. The brothers should stay in one place and not be changed from house to house. He had that problem in Mons, he had that problem everywhere. And to fill the gaps made by those who die or left who had to be dismissed for misconduct, it was proposed to have 1, 2, or 3 novices in each house according to its revenue and its personnel needs. And 6, finally, a new form of government was to be set up, and they actually had started to put together another rule that they sent to the cardinal. Unfortunately, the cardinal put it on the shelf. So in the long run, the cardinal turned out to be pretty good to the society. Okay, so those were the conditions, and here was Bartholomew going along with this thing. And then when the pastor in Mons is running short of brothers and needs more brothers, he writes to De Breu as the superior of the society instead of to Bartholomew. So these Sulpicians were taking over the whole thing, so it was in a terrible, terrible state. So it was a real crisis in the history of the Institute, there's no question. Yes?
On page 132, you get an appreciation for Bartholomew's position, second last paragraph.
Yes. The old trick that they used every time, hold back the salaries. Huh? To get Bartholomew to agree to the plan, De La Salle's rival took the quickest way. He had the brothers' salaries cut off, so the brothers had to go to starvation rations. When they went to collect the money, even asked for charity, they were told to apply to De Breu. Well, very religious and generous priests who would surely come to their help. Showed confidence in him, even to choose him for their superior. They find in him a firm resource. There was another De La Salle. The brothers were in no hurry, they were wary, they had not lost hope of seeing their father again, they feared he might return. So, all of that. What do you mean, Gus? Huh?
Yeah, that's the one.
So now, why did De La Salle take so long to get back? We have some evidence from some of the letters that he wanted to make a final tour of the houses in Provence. There's reference to that somewhere along the line. I've forgotten where now. Help me, Gus. A letter. Not listening. Doesn't matter. A letter from Bartholomew that, it's the priest in Mons writing to Bartholomew, says that he has heard that De La Salle has left Grenoble and that he's making a tour. And also the biography of Yves de Sallion says that when he came back, De La Salle went on a tour to Marseille. Well, all right. But if you want to find the real reason, go beyond your assignment for today to page 143. The second last paragraph. As it was decreed in the councils of eternal wisdom that every day of John Baptist's life should be marked by the cross, it was not long before he encountered new humiliations. His great enemy no longer lived. God had called him while the servant of God was still at Grenoble. And of course, Hernandez has the footnote, Chétardi died on June the 29th, 1714. The news of the former's death, which he received there, had hastened his return to Paris. Now, we didn't get the news until around the 1st of July, obviously. You know? For he would not have dared to come back if that man had still been alive. De La Salle himself stated this to some of the brothers he trusted, who must have communicated this to Blanc. Huh? But his powerful adversary, although no longer living, had left behind a people who inherited his views and prejudices against the servant of God. So that seems to me to be the best reason why De La Salle hesitated, although he had agreed in principle perhaps to obey that order and saw what it involved. He took his time, and it wasn't until he was really sure that Chétardi was out of the way that he would be in a position to come back at all. And he apparently conveyed that to some people. Good?
Do you think that the latter pages about this whole period, as written by Blaine, have a great deal of veracity about them because it's being supervised by Timothy?
Yes. Sure, I said so. That's what I said. That's why I think we can trust the encounter in Mons, yeah, and we can trust this remark too about the business of Chétardi, death and coming along in the picture, very definitely.
Why is it that Blanc sometimes avoids mentioning persons' names, but he uses X here to talk about the crew?
Some of them are probably still alive when he was writing.
He's done that before.
Yeah. Some of them are, you know, it's one of those niceties of 17th century, 18th century politeness too, I suppose. Not to say anything suspicious about people, and if people are going to guess who it is, then he has to have a couple of paragraphs about how wonderful they are. But then the devil gets to them or something.
Yes. I'm trying to explain that delay again. Wasn't it true that when Singletown had that order to come back to Paris, that he discussed that with Sister Louise?
Well, yes, that seems to, her biographers say that, and up until then, she had undoubtedly been hoping that he'd stay there forever as the chaplain. But she's supposed to have told him that, no, this is your work, and you have to obey just like the rest of them, and she encouraged him to accept it.
I figure that may have taken a week or two for her to
get around to that. Yeah, well, that's possible, but that would only bring you into the middle of April, huh? And here we are, according to this account, he didn't even, he was unwilling to come back to Paris as long as Chétardi was still alive. So he was delaying his obedience until he could be sure that he wouldn't get into the same mess all over again.
I assume he walked.
Probably, yes. And he went by way, we know he went by way of Lyon, where he stopped to venerate those relics, and he stopped in Dijon also and to visit that school. I didn't show that slide of that school, did I, this time?
How long would it take him to walk from South France?
Well, they covered a good bit of time. It's amazing how quickly they get from one place to the other. I guess they might cover, 20, 30 miles a day, something like that. They were used to that type of walking. For example, when they went to Liège, they left early in the morning and they came back that night, and that's about 25 miles each way. Gus?
I have just been amazed at the whole description of walking. At the end of Blaine, book 4, there's a series of biographies of brothers that Blaine admired, and walking that they had to do. Like when he called that retreat at Vaud-Girard, the men had to walk from Rheims out to Vaud-Girard, which was 80 miles. You know, they did it day after day, and some of the brothers were sick. At one point, they were carrying the brothers with them. And they arrived completely exhausted. And, at that time, the fellow now told Bartholomew that we should have them come by horseback. But it wasn't always fair. They didn't have the money to come on.
And when he went from Paris to Rouen with the two brothers, they walked that and they stayed at inns. And that was another thing. They'd stop overnight at usually they'd get hospitality from some convent or some other priest. That was a custom. Everybody was on the road in those days, and it was easy to get the free accommodations overnight or very inexpensively. And the one time, though, when it was a hurry to get up there, Larry Marks, he went by stagecoach to see the Archbishop on that first shot going into Rouen, but that was considered very extraordinary. And the same thing with Mademoiselle Lescure, who rented her horse. The horse, to get back over all of those very canyon-type things, that would have been a great advantage. But if you read the Poutet thing, or the Charles, I think it's part of that Charles Pierre thing, the road to travel, you know, when you see the cost of all of those various means of transportation, as he concludes at the end of that, that's why they almost always went on foot.
Do we have any evidence of any communication between the brothers in Paris and the Slavs in the south, that period?
Nothing except that final order, all right? That's the only evidence we have in there, if you're talking about evidence. But he did send that brother Jacques, the director in Grenoble, he sent him up to Paris to find out what was going on, but we have no idea what Jacques reported when he came back.
I was just hypothesizing, laughing to myself, saying he probably got word that St. Charles was dying or lingering sick for a month or so, and said, let the old bird die before I go back. Or, you know, well, I was wondering if there was any, that would probably substantiate, give better evidence to why he delayed so long.
Well, no, but see, the problem with the delay is why did he delay after he got the message from Paris, okay? He didn't show any intention of going back there. Now, the letter from the brothers commanding him to come back is dated April 1st. It's the previous September that he sends the brother up to Paris, and apparently what the brother had to report to him, he didn't like the sound of it at all. I strongly suspect, you know, my guess would be that that brother said, well, you know, things are going differently. Looks like Bartholomew's knuckling under these Sulpicians. They've got a hold of the whole thing. And he said, oh, I don't think I want to get involved in any of that again. You know? And so the thing that, so I don't think he was thinking of going back at all until the letter came. Then he decides he has to obey somehow, helped maybe by Sister Louise. But he doesn't get back for 3 months. Amy?
The question maybe Gus will address it later, talking about personality, but it seems like in the later part of his life, his personality has changed somewhat, because earlier on, if he had an encounter with a pastor, for example, it's fine, he'll just pull out of here. It seems to me opposition head on, and here it sounds like he's retreating from like
yeah, but by that time, of course, the Paris establishment was really the center of the whole operation in a certain sense. He had set up another center in Rouen, but there was a commitment of a large number of brothers, and it was in the capital, and it was in before all the ecclesiastical superiors and everything else like that. So, and he may have just I think he might possibly have begun to mistrust his vision a little bit and think, well, maybe they're right and I'm wrong. Because why does this happen to me every place I go? 50 million Frenchmen can't be wrong. If you add them up, it comes pretty close to that. Oh, it's time for lunch. Okay.